As I said just before, I would like to welcome you to listen to Bjørn Jacobsen for his talk on being a one-man band audio department. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, my name is Bjørn Jacobsen. Just a quick heads up, I forgot to take my ADHD medication this morning, so if I speak really fast and this talk is 10 minutes short, then you know why. I am working on a game called PAX Day. It's made in Finland and Iceland. It's a 300 square kilometer map. It's about crafting, combat, medieval lore, PvP, PvE, sandbox, giant thing. Here's some of the maps. The company's called Mainframe. 60 plus developers, Finland and Iceland. If Finland and Iceland wasn't remote enough, then there's also some remote people like me. I'm in Copenhagen. And one sound guy. That's me, and I do everything from scratch. So whatever Simon said before about 200 people sound departments, no, it's one guy. I do, of course, have some code help whenever I can't dig into code, or if I don't have access to some kind of value, then someone helps me out with that, or someone helps me out with very deep and advanced blueprint setups because we're doing it in Unreal. But apart from that, everything in Wwise, everything set up, the music design. We do have a composer, but the music design, editing, splitting it up, making variations, hours long of music out of a 10-minute piece, and so on. That's me. And variations, VO, you got it. Me in numbers. This picture is a little old, by the way, but yeah, don't care. I'm 43. I have 3 daughters. I live in 2720. I've made games for more than 10 years. I have 8,000 subs plus on YouTube because apparently I run a channel that does tutorials on audio. I don't know if you follow it, but it's kind of taken off. I just wanted to do videos because it was fun and answer people's questions, and apparently people watch it, so I'm a little humbled by it. I've made more than 20 games. Made games with Wwise for more than 10 years. I've made a lot of electronic music, and they were all in 138 BPM. Some kind of projects that I've worked on, just to show you the variety of what I do, and why I think PAX is awesome to work on. The latest Assassin's Creed for Ubisoft in Düsseldorf. Hostile Mars is also a one-guy project that's doing a gigantic shooter on Mars. The Ascent, Shrapnel, Hitman, Eve Online, Eve Valkyrie, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, yes. Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I'm just, I have a credit that says I did technical stuff. Technically, I just talked to them and was helping them out during COVID, but nonetheless, I'm on the credits list. Let's talk about Wwise the one-man band way, because I am the one-man band. When I first joined Mainframe 4 years ago, I think. The project was really big. It's going to be big. I will be alone. I'll be very lonely. I like that because I like to talk to myself and sit alone in my room. And the project is not procedural, but it's not linear anyway, so it'll be extremely random. We know where things are, but we don't know how the universe behaves. So if some weather VFX guy decides that now it should rain, I'll have to deal with that. And we don't know when it rains, we don't know when it's sunny, we don't know how many clouds, when there will be cloudy, and so on. But we know the numbers. And from the very start, I asked my co-developers and programmers and whatnot that every time you have a variable that you think you want to share for me to have as a parameter, just do it, because I can probably use it for something. And if I don't want to use it, it's not ever wasted. It's just a value that's there, and if I need it later, I can use it. So, and you'll see later when I show you some of the project stuff. I asked for using Wwise because I like to use Wwise, but Wwise also fuels my creativity when it comes to working. I don't have to invent the wheel. I may have to build all the sprockets, but the wheel is already there and it runs. Wwise is not for everybody, because if you use Wwise as a one-to-one sampler, then Wwise is, as any other sampler, a really stupid tool, because then it's just an event and it plays something. But if you feed it values and you go systemic and you really want to use it for something that helps you work, and if you understand how it works, then the content that you throw into it will be a huge advantage. And because I'm alone, there's nobody to stop me whenever I want to do something. That's the fun part. So when we first fired it up, the project is empty. The game has no audio, no logic. So the first thing that I did was to, instead of add audio, I started building my Wwise project with all the RTPCs, switches, and states that I know I will need and that I want. So location states, time of day states, what biome are we in? Is it cloudy? Is it clear? How light is it? How much is it raining? What type of dungeon are you in? Is it dangerous where you are? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. For states. And I did the same thing for RTPCs. Like, I need distance, I need the arrow speed, I need to know exactly how many trees are close to you, how many flies are there, how foggy is it, how light is it. Like, if you look into the sun, then it becomes very bright, then there's a high-pass filter that makes everything sound fluffy, just because I can. All these things, because I know I will need them later, so I started to prep my project with that. We did the same thing with switches. What type of tree do you have? What type of altitude are we in? Like, are we in the deepest pit, or are we on the mountain? What type of rain do we have? How hard is the tree? Like, is it a hard tree? Is it a big tree? Is it a small tree? Is it us? Is it someone else? What kinds of pants are we wearing? What kind of shirt are we wearing? And what type of damage did we take? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And some of these are also the same as the states, but sometimes I need to know on an object, and sometimes I just need to know globally, so I use them sort of like intertwined, states and switches. I decided from the very start that I will be using as few AK components as possible. That's not because AK components are bad, or that you shouldn't have them. And it's not that if I need one, I won't make a new one. It's just because I have as few as possible, then there are fewer places to send my information. So, for example, with our ambience and so on, I only have one place to send how much is it raining, how much is it light, how much is the light, how cloudy is it, all that stuff. I only have one place to send it, and I know where to send it. Instead of having to find it, I don't have to write any code or make a blueprint that grabs a certain object or searches for an object, finds the AK component, adds it to that, and so on. No, I only need to, in this case, because the ambient system runs on the player character, so simply just find the player, add it there, that's it. So everything that can run on one component does so. And I prefer, because I don't know where we're going to be, and like I said, the game is very random, so we'll have one event as often as possible that starts a system that runs in Wwise instead of having hundreds of events that trigger something many times. Like the ambient system, it's triggered once and then it just lifts off information from RTPCs, switches, and states. And it does so because I don't want to trigger stuff on top of each other, and so on, because that makes a mess, and then I have to keep track of more events. It's not that events are bad, but if I can deal with it in Wwise and a very strict priority kill voices, virtual voice setup, then I can have pretty big setups running at the same time in the background, and it won't take more power out of the machine than necessary. So we have our player AK component, and we send all these information to it. Enjoy my beautiful audio designer art for the rest of the show, by the way. It sends the player's health info, the physics, how, like, where are you, etc. And the weather channel grabs into the weather channel. It's actually called the weather channel, the little node we have in our blueprint. And it knows how much is it raining, how wet is the ground, and so on. So we have these persistent AK components that are like single use. Global component because something needs to run at the whole time. The music component also needs to run at the whole time because the music can't be on the player as much as I would like to, but the player, for good reason, isn't exactly spawned when you're in the menu. So the music does have its own component. The player has a component. Every NPC has a component. And then, of course, we have components for special events. We made a pool of AK components. I think we have 20. That just lies over there in the editor somewhere in a pile. Whenever you ask for a sound to be played on a location, instead of spawning one and then dying again afterwards, it grabs one of the available ones, places it there, and plays the sound and removes the component again. In that way, we don't have to spawn components all the time, in and out. And that saves us 0.01 CPU and some engineers happy. We send all these informations to the various stuff that our player needs. If he makes a grunt, what surface type for locomotion, what armor is he wearing, etc. Time of day, biome, rain amount, and it all goes to the player component because then he knows. Because let's say with armor, at one point when armor was a thing that got properly implemented into the game, I had a system that was already ready and a switch that was already ready, already sent to the correct player component. So the developer who made all the armor, I just told him, set the switch on this link to an AK component, tell it that now you're wearing chainmail. And he did, and it works, because if you're walking around butt naked, then of course your armor says nothing, but if you wear armor, it makes this clickety-clackety, very typical medieval sound. And that's usually metal from my kitchen just being torn around. The same thing goes for our ambient system. I'm trying to remember which screenshots I took. Let's say if we are in the barren environment, then it checks what time of day do we have, and then it switches to that specific one. It plays sort of like a bed of ambient sounds for that environment, let's say the barren environment. And it plays the barren midday birds and the midday insects, and they sort of like live off RTPCs at the same time. Because, let's say these insect wings, they are changing depending on how high up are you. Because if you're suddenly in a barren environment, high up in a mountain, then there won't be any insects, or there will only be a specific type of insect, and so on. And I don't know where the player is, and I don't know if terraforming is a thing, or if someone can build something really tall and then go there. Do we want to change it? So I made it systemic and just use RTPCs to track it. I don't have ambient boxes to tell me where I am, because the player could go anywhere they want. RTPC wetness is how wet the ground is. So if the ground is wet, no insects either. This rattlesnake here, that's the thing. When you go from one biome to the other, a lot of these sweetener sounds are sort of like turned down at the beginning so that the transition from one biome to the other is very smooth. They're very quiet when you walk across it. But if you go deeper into barren or deeper into forest, then these insects or whatever can be turned up, but they can also be turned down. This rattlesnake, for example, is more apparent when you're deeper into the biome than not. And then we have the birds, and I know it looks messy when you have multiple RTPCs like that, but it's for the sake of the example. It's not because I normally look at them all combined like that. But here we have the birds. If it's very windy or if it's rainy, if the RTPC for rain or wind goes up, the bird volume goes down. If we go high up, then there is a switch. In this case, as you see, there is not. But maybe there is a switch that determines that on top of the mountain, you only hear an eagle. And if you're down at the bottom, maybe you hear hundreds of little peep-peep things. Each are controlled individually, so certain things, of course, aren't lowered by wind or rain or whatnot. And they're very different. All these they don't have necessarily unique ones, but I go to every biome, I go to every location I can find and check what value do we have. Oh, this bird is loud up here, it needs to go down. And then I can just live profile in Wwise where, and that's a very useful tool, by the way, Simon, live profiling, where I can then simply just see what is the altitude right now. Oh, then lower the volume. I also made a number of debug tools on my own. For example, just me saying the value of the altitude parameter. So if I go somewhere, it's just me saying 1, 2, 3, 100 meters, 110 meters, 120 meters. That means that I know the value even without profiling it. Then I can just know, let's say 120. Then when I go back into the editor, then it's 120. That's where the cut needs to be. And debug tools are great when you make them like that. So here we have a Wwise session. I just uploaded these to YouTube this morning, so I actually don't know how good the video quality is, but it will play audio quality. This here is the normal barren the biome. We'll hear the difference between daytime and nighttime, and we'll tweak the wet and wind conditions a little bit. The change is not always super apparent. The crickets disappear a little as we go into the biome. They go away if it gets wet and so on. But the whole point is that when you're playing the game and you're running around, then all these tiny differences, and because everything behaves differently, makes the forest or the barren environment or whatever you're in come to life. As you're walking through the forest, then the crickets change a little and there's a different bird, and because you jump, then something happens over there and so on. Let's see. Yeah, and I cranked up the volume, by the way, just for the sake of the example. It doesn't sound like this in the game. Going over to nighttime. Okay, like I said, it's a little loud because I turned up the volume just so that you can hear the changes. Of course, it's way more nice and polished, and the rumble in the background, of course, isn't there because whatever that is, distant cars or whatever in the recordings that I made, they're not there when you play the game because the volume is so low. God damn it, don't do that. Here we go. Here it goes with birds. They're soloed a little, and it's based on wind and rain and so on. Like I said, the difference on what you're hearing may be very subtle, but imagine that all the layers are doing this in a different way. So when you move around the environment, these things makes the whole world come to life. So imagine we're on top of a mountain and we walk down. So depending on where you are, this specific layer is very quiet or a little more apparent. The reverb changes a little and so on, depending on where you go. Why does it auto start? Come on. So here is an example of what it's like when you walk around in the environment that we have. If we turn up the rain parameter, what does that actually sound? We don't have visual rain in the game right now, but that is coming, and we used to have it, but we've been working on it, and the VFX is working on it, and so on. It's coming at some point, but here's an example of what it sounds like if the rain system is also triggered. There's also thunder. If you see a lightning in the background or something, then the timing of where that is actually linked down to 340 meters per second. Delays, when do you hear the rumble in the background and so on. Lightning. Something that I'd like to be able to do in reality, just turn down rain and it goes away. So rain, thunder, wind, all these things, they're all intertwined with these parameters because I have no idea when they happen. They just happen, and I know that my system is able to handle it when you're walking around. Here we have, this is the player's audio component. I don't know if you can see, but we have various input systems for rain, wind, light, the temperature, the time of day, and so on. And they're all updated on the fly. It checks every 0.5 seconds because I don't need it on frame. And then engineers are also happy when you say you don't check stuff on frame. It sets what biome we're in, sets the biome depth as well. And as you can see, 0.5 seconds up in the right corner, if the resolution is fine. Then it simply just checks all the weather manager stuff, checks my stuff, and so on. But all this was started with one event that just started on init. Just play the ambient system, and then this works. When it comes to footsteps, because we have an equally elaborate system for player when he's walking around as we have with the rain, because I have no idea where the player is. I have no idea what the player decides to wear for armor. I have no idea how wet the ground is, how high up they are. Are they walking up the mountain or down the mountain, and so on. But we do have those parameters available. I've been told that parameters gives away that I'm not an American. Parameters, good. So the footstep, again, enjoy these nice flow charts. We have one main event for For the footstep, it just checks, are we on the ground or are we in the water? If we're in the water, then is the camera above or below the water, and that determines we play a muffled or a clear swim stroke sound. If we're on the ground, it checks the surface material, how wet is the ground, and then plays whatever material we have depending on the wetness. It also has a slope relative, so if we're walking up the hill, the footsteps are a little louder and more chunky and lower in pitch. If we're walking down the hill, they're a little pitched up so that it really feels like you're when you're coming down the mountain and when you're going up the mountain. The same thing goes if you're on a rocky surface. Then there is, if you're going up the hill, if you're just walking on flat ground, there's nothing. But if you're walking up the hill, tiny rocks will fall off. And that depends on player's speed, because if you're sneaking up the mountain, of course, there's nothing. If you're running, these rocks will fall down all the time. So here is an example of our character, bare naked, suddenly wearing armor, and the wetness changes. And we are changing to wearing armor. That's just metal shoes. But if we also put on chainmail armor for shirts and pants, if the ground becomes wet, so if we have a rocky landscape and we're going up and down the hill, the value being treated here is the slope. It's the relative slope depending on the direction that we're walking in, because I had a VFX guy who was really awesome who thought that slope is relative to where the player is going and not just what's the slope of the terrain you're actually on. So here we go. And if we're walking up the hill, and if we're walking down the hill, the character has a visible animation when walking up and down the hill. It really is up the hill, it's like this, and down the hill he's very stepping differently. And this is an easy way to, instead of having unique tags and unique triggers and everything like that, we just have animation tag that says he made a footstep, and then everything is systemic depending on where you are, what material you're on, and so on, so that I don't have to care about footstep uphill, footstep downhill, footstep this and that, and so on. And this is where we calculate the slope. The VFX guy did this for me, so math shit. But it lives off the vector of the player, normalizes it, simply just knows exactly if we're up and down. Here comes the music setup, and we only have one event that says start music. I think it's actually just called play music, if I remember correctly. It plays the intro when you're entering the game, plays the menu music. When you go into the character creator over on the right, the music changes, and that's one of the situations where I took one of the pieces and all the stems that the composer gave us and then made this ambient piece that can just live off in the character creator. If you go to the lobby, it's a little different, and then it changes in and out. So he's still the composer, and I remixed the hell out of everything he sent me with his permission. And then once you go into the game, you can only be in two states, ambient or combat. For ambient, it just checks what biome are you in, and usually we have more silence than we have music, because we just have silent tracks, and then random timings between it's allowed to play music, and then it doesn't always play music. So, because we don't want information overload and just thousands of hours of music constantly being played. If you want that, you can buy the record when it comes out and put it on instead. It tracks what time of day is it. So depending on if you're in a forest, then there's a darker theme at night than a lighter theme at day. If we suddenly go to combat, it also checks what biome are we in, is it day or is it night, what danger level is it, and so on. And then it plays that specific combat element. And here is an example of starting the game, going into the menu, going into the character creator, and then going into the actual game. Let's see. So we're going from the opening scene, the menu. We clicked the character creator. And now we're in the character creator. The same thing happens for lobby or whatever, and even depending on different types of what you're editing on the character, it's just a different drone that plays. And we clicked enter and went into the game, and now what would have been really nice was if the random system would play a piece of music right from the get-go, but it doesn't because I've told it to be quiet most of the time. But let's say we go into combat. And this is just danger level 1. If we go to danger level 2, it automatically changes. All of these pieces have 10 variations. So we keep track of all of these variations so that which one is currently playing, and the transition will fit that specific one. So the changes in there is, I forgot what values I've set it to, but what if it goes from you're fighting a lone wolf to 50 wolves? Or if the person you're fighting is less powerful than you, then it's just a level 1 danger. But if you're really in danger, then it's level 5, and then it goes, as you heard, with choir and everything. And hours of reverb, because I love reverb and compressors. Let's try the different combat levels if you're in a dungeon. This is like the exact same thing, you're just in a different environment. So we killed all the zombies or whatever there is in the dungeon. And now we're in the dungeon. That has, compared to being outdoors in the wild, has music all the time playing. So this, as you hear now, it's playing all the time. A composed piece by the composer that wasn't originally there because these violins are from a different tune that he sent us, and so on. So all these remixed versions are just my take on what I needed, because we couldn't keep asking for very specific things every second. Here is combat in not the same area as the one before, but when we're in the open, depending on if it's day or night. So that's daytime, and you're fighting, I don't know, 2 wolves. And this is nighttime, and you're fighting a much angrier wolf. And straight to level 5, I think. There we go. So, and that cello, by the way, is like a stack of compressors and 2 reverbs of both 20 seconds, just to make it so grand and massive. That's not in the original composition. I did so with permission. Fortunately for me, our composer was cool with completely tearing up his stuff. So, not everything in a game needs custom content. I know that Greg before was talking about that you shouldn't necessarily take stuff straight from a library. I don't either, but I use libraries for literally everything. Throw it into something and I twist and turn it. Lots of parameters and lots of automation and lots of plugins that tweak it so that it fits what I need. And if I'm in the mood for making more, even though I made more than I need, I continue my creative flow to create a library of my own, because I might need it later in the process. Not everything needs custom content until it does, because I can. Multiple NPCs was one of the issues that we have. We had, what if an NPC spawns? He says, "Ugh," whenever he attacks you, and he says, "Arr," whenever you hit him, and so on. And what if 5 of them spawn? Is it then 5 at the same time, or what do you do? But meet Bob, Kenny, Alex, and Frank. These are just 4. We have 10 of each. But we made a system that's called the NPC randomizer, just for the lack of a better name. It just gives them a random value whenever they spawn, so that we know that you shouldn't really call people by numbers. You should call them by name. So number 4 is Frank. Let's just say Frank. Hi, Frank. Frank spawns into the game, and he says "Arr" the way only Frank does. But in comes Bob from the left, and he says "Arr" as only Bob does. I think it's number 3. That's me. So Alex is Bjorn. Yes. Here comes the grunts of these various personalities. I'm only going to showcase the 4, but we do have all 10 of them. Right now, we don't have it split into genders. We will have some sort of, you can sort of like pick what type of voice you want. But right now, it's very generic. It's 3 guys and a girl, me, 2 friends, and a girl that we had in. And it's based on their health. So our voice direction says you say whenever you get hit, but if you're low on health, you go and so on. And we have this for high health, medium health, low health, and you're close to dying. And we have that for every sound. So whenever you fight them, you don't necessarily notice it when you play the game, but it's there, and it makes sure that it's not repetitive. It's just a thing. And I don't expect anyone to come and pat me on the shoulder afterwards and go, "Oh, I really noticed version 5 of the death grunt of Alex." No, I don't expect anyone to do that. But because it's there, then at least they won't come and tell me, oh, I think it's boring when Alex dies, because it's not, because Alex is me, and there's like 50 of, We did this for every NPC, every type of monster, every type of cultist you can meet, every type of ghost, every type of whatever. Not the animals, but my studio is very small and air circulation is really bad, so when you record breathing, we almost fainted. But it was fun. Let's go. This is an attack.
Yeah.
And we change it. This is number 2.
Yeah.
This is a different person. That's me. And here comes Sarah. So let's go down and make sure that Sarah gets a little hurt, right? So when she's swinging her sword. Why does it say music? It has automated captions on. This is when also attacks, yeah. But we get to hurts whenever you get hurt. Oh, no, wait. This is when you get hurt. In full health. That's me. And I'm bleeding, so now I'm close to dying. And you really shouldn't continue to stab people if they're already almost dead, but you do. This is Sarah. This is one guy. When they're close to dying, compared to when he's at full health. It just gives it a little variety when you're fighting them, because he's being like really big and nasty when you're fighting them. It takes the characters, it just simply gives it a random value between 1 and 10 and adds the name random to it, so random 1, random 2, random 3, whatever, and sets it to the NPC randomizer. So whenever a character spawns, it is now a number. I'm sorry for giving them numbers for names, but that's how it works when you're in a video game. I couldn't just name them Frank, Kenny, Jonathan, whatever. And here we have, it listens for the player's health, divides it by its max health so that we have a value between 0 and 100, and that becomes our RTPC. So if it's a really powerful character, then it's the same system, because if he has more than 100 in maximum health, then it's only when he's below 25% that he starts to sound like he's dying. The same goes if you're a character with only 20 health to begin with, then it's when you're below, what, 5 or something? 25% of 25, I don't know. And it goes something like this. You're fighting one guy. This is an acolyte. This is, the video is a little strange because he's also throwing magic and he's doing all sorts of weird gizmo-y things. So it can be a little hard to hear his grunts, but they're there. For the sake of the video, of course, again, everything is cranked up, so it's really loud and unmixed, but you get the point, I hope. But what if we meet 3 enemies at the same time? This is probably Bob, Frank, and Alex you're fighting. They don't like you. And when you get bored of fighting them, of course, as a developer, you have cheating methods, so you can just kill them all in one go if you want to. Unavailable to normal people, but die. There you go. And then you can pick up their stuff and run around. So that's the difference between 1 NPC and 3. And it just gives them variety. And if there's even more of them, then we have a strict prioritization system so that the one that's the furthest away, you don't hear them. The one that's closest, if it's not a special enemy, then they have priority over the ones that are further away, and so on and on and on. And if something plays, its priority, and it's further away, if it's something that I really wanted to hear, then that specific sound gets a crank up in priority, and so on. So the voice is just sent to virtual or either killed. And stop it. There you go. This is what happens when you fight a ghost. It's just one ghost, just so that you can see what the ghosts sound like. And the ghost died. He's called a confused soul. I guess he is, because why would someone just show up and fight him? And finally, we have the wisp that you can't really kill in the game, but because I'm a dev, I can. And it dies. Sometimes it would be nice when you're playing the game to have that just kill all NPCs button. But that is PAG's day and all my systemic approaches to it. And that's it. If you have any questions, then fire away. There's a lot of default answers, more we were there for fun, but if you have questions, I'll answer.
Hello.
Hey.
Thanks for the talk. It's here.
All right,
Bjørn. Yeah. Thanks for the talk. It's very impressive stuff.
Thank you.
Especially working alone.
Yeah. But like I said, there was no one to stop me.
Yeah.
So.
I think like my question is about the ambience system. From what I understood is one emitter, which then is it like the ambience. Is it always 2D, and was that a static choice, or was that like a technical limitation, or was it like, this is a way that I can get this giant game done my way without having to have like 1,000 events for each thing and have a lot of like object-based things and have everything spatialized?
Well, there's always a 2D layer that plays, always. But then the birds, they spawn with listener or emitter listener automation around the listener with randomized 3D positions. So sometimes if one spawns, it's too far away. You don't actually hear it. But then they move and so on, especially with the flies. If you're in an area with a lot of flies, you literally hear a fly buzz around your face. Because Wwise lets me actually... Oh, we have Wwise with us. For here, midday birds. And listener automation, it just has all these paths. And then it just plays all these random patterns, and these are the birds that are spawning. All of them have these patterns, and they spawn around you and so on. The same goes for, like flies and every detail that's in there, so that it makes it even more randomized so that I can't control it. I control the pattern it should follow, but I don't control when it actually happens. Yeah?
Right, yeah, cool.
And then a bunch of 2D sounds sometimes play, and sometimes 2D layers are faded in and out, but 3D sounds here and there. And like you saw with the RTPCs that control it, some of them are inaudible, and then some of them are audible. But in the other situations, it's the other way around, or maybe you hear them both. Maybe they're pitched a little, and so on. So if you're standing in the forest and you walk 100 meters that way, the parameters have changed. but the sounds have not. But because they changed, the flies are a little more apparent, the birds are a little more distant, and so on. So it sounds like the environment is changing, but this is a video game, so it's fake. Everything is fake. Because I can't find that exact forest and go with my microphone and record that specific forest. So everything is just, well, you know that, but everything is just fake, yeah.
Yeah, of course. No, it makes sense. Yeah, I was just kind of curious about like the main system that you have like rattlesnakes and everything, and then they seem to be like in the emitter and in the same kind of playing together as this kind of 2D thing, which like again, really, really cool. But then was that like an aesthetical choice that you wanted, like, or like what when you separated the 2D environment from the things that you actually wanted an object to play, or even the birds that you have like randomized around you? Is that like?
Yeah, it's definitely an aesthetic choice, but it's also a choice that gives me the best result with the most
resource.
With the most or least resources, but also with the most amount of control. So everything that happens, even though it's randomized, I know why it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Thank you so much, man.
Hey, you're welcome. Hey, Chen.
Hey, thank you. Great stuff.
Thank you.
So I want to ask you about how you cope with production demands. So I don't know anything about this game other than what I heard today, but it looks like a fairly large game.
It's pretty big.
Yeah, and you're just one person. And obviously you have your templates and systems that you implement to cope with all of this scope. But what do you do? How do you respond when developers have new features coming and or they just want to revise an entire feature, for example, refactor, whatever. So how do you cope with that scope? What are your strategies?
Most of the time I ask, fortunately for me on this project, it's very transparent whenever somebody changes something. So, which makes it a lot easier so that it's not something that's suddenly snuck through the back door and suddenly something has changed. And then communication is really vital to it. What we've done in certain places when suddenly they change combat, we would like at the end of the combat attack to make a little grunt when you do the special power move and so on. That was a request that came in. It's then done in the simplest way possible, usually just by tagging an animation in that case. But most of this game is made out of data assets. So every weapon has a data asset that knows exactly what it does. So if the game tells you, because the player clicked the left mouse button, the player swung his sword, or the player did something, then it asks the data asset, which event should I play when I swing this specific sword or this specific hammer and so on. So because everything is data driven like that, then if we need if suddenly a new weapon comes into the game, it's very easy to sort of go into Wwise, create the new events with the new name, play swing sword _ we have a sword called Die Zweihänder, which is very nice. Like that one, and then you add that specifically to it, and then it just works. And because everything is data-driven, that means that every time they add something new, it's still in that data asset that everything is controlled. So it's very rare that I need to go and invent a new sprocket or a new miniature wheel to follow it. Because if it wasn't like that, then doing this alone would be impossible.
Yeah, so you build a scalable system from the get-go, so then you can later, it's very advantageous later on when there are changes. Yeah.
Also, I've taken some of my sorrows in advance. Like I know that right now you can't see the rain, and I know that the thunder doesn't work or something like that. But I've made a system that takes rain into account, and I've made a system that knows when it's thunderous, how does it sound. We don't have a parameter for how many clouds are there, but I've made the system so that in case the parameter changes, then something sounds a little different, because if you're walking on a cloudy day, the birds are less active than if it's super sunny. So whenever a VFX guy decides to actually do the clouds, then that parameter is already there. So hopefully it's plug and play, and they do it, and then it works, and then I'll tweak it, of course. But I looked ahead a lot. Like when we started the project, as you saw, the first thing that I did was to shape all my parameters and variables and states and switches and whatnot, simply just to be ahead of time so that I know exactly what I want. But that also made it possible to call out to the programmers and the developers in the beginning and say, oh, you're working on weather. Would be really nice to have these parameters thrown at me. And you hook them up into your Wise node like this and so on, so that they already know how to deal with it when they make it. Because the worst that can happen is that they make a new feature, and then when they are done with it, they move on to work on something else. And then I just come and try and piggyback on them and be like, hey, can I like have this added? And they're like, yeah, but there's no time because production moved them on to, I don't know, work on frogs or something.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I looked ahead. I tried. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome. There's a blinding light, so I can barely see if someone has their hand up. So.
Don't worry, I've got it.
Hi, Bjørn. Thanks so
Jacob.
much for the talk. Very interesting and very impressive. I just want to hear maybe a bit of context in terms of the timeline of all this. Like, how long has this project been ongoing with you at their side? And like, what was the initial process of setting up everything you'll be expecting to implement versus like more maintenance and additive stuff? Like, what's the timeline look like?
The timeline for this and the project now is 4.5 years, I think. 4. But a lot of the time has been that you could power up the game and you could run around. So I had a lot of time because the scale of the game is so big and there's been so much time. If this was a short-term process, we need a game and it needs to be out in 6 months or a year, and it was still me alone, I would never have made it this deep and detailed, and I would never have made 10 different grunts for every type of grunt for 10 different NPCs and given them names and birthdays and stuff. No, I would have approached it completely differently if I had a shorter time frame, for sure. But this is what's possible when you have time, and I didn't have to learn the tool to begin with because I kind of know Wise.
Cool. Thanks.
You're welcome. Yeah. Anyone else?
Anyone else? Yeah.
Go ahead. You're gonna tear me apart, Greg? So
Thanks a lot for your talk.
Thank you.
I just want to ask, having so much of elements in one event and having state-based system for so many elements, for example, for music, do you use event-based packaging? And if yes, how do you overcome referencing so much of the events at the level of, because you're referencing with the states of the music, you're referencing like many elements from many parts of the music. And do you soft reference them and load them based on the biome, or how does it go?
No. We play the music system, and then we have only one place on the what's it called? The player. The character audio component. Player audio component. I forgot what I called it, but it's all in the same blueprint. So the information about what biome you're in comes in, and it checks. And then it sets the state in one place so that it doesn't happen where I don't have control over it. And that makes it... we have not been at a point where we have lost references or where packaging sort of got up in a mishmash. I love event-based packaging. I spent a whole day converting the project from one sound bank of 2.5 gigs into event-based packaging. Way. Yeah, and it was a hard time trying to do the process and then submit it. And technically, you're not allowed to do a 2.53 gig submit every time you do it. But I had to explain our build engineer that this was for a good cause. And he was like, what's the good cause? But it'll save us 2.5 gigs of memory usage. How about that? And he was very happy. So we put it in, and we went from 2.5 gigs to 20 megs at all times. Maximum of 10, 15 voices at any given time for anything besides audio, besides music and ambience. I
assume that if you have like 20 megs of in the memory for a budget, I assume that you have some sort of soft reference to the music, because the music in a game, for example, 3 biomes, it's absolutely more than 20 megs. So probably.
Oh yeah, no.
So you somehow reference it.
Yes,
in a soft reference rather than a hard reference.
The music system, lovely enough, loads what comes next in chunks. So it knows what's playing now and what plays next, and then it sort of doesn't load everything else. I get the question now. It loads ahead of time, and it knows what's coming. And then more often than not, because that saves memory, that if you have a piece of music and you know that if the state changes, it goes into a different piece of music or something like that, or maybe the same piece of music. Maybe you have the same piece of music in a different file. That takes up more disk space, but that means that it has a different WEM file. It has a different media file, which means that when it changes, it loads that file, and this file gets forgotten. So it never uses memory of them all at one time, because if it was all in one media file, of course that media file would be humongous, and I don't want that. And fortunately for me as well, that's different from music and ambience, but it's only the current scene that you're in, even though the map is 150 by 150 kilometers, it's really huge, then it's only the square and the surrounding squares that you are in that are currently loaded at any time. So a player jumping at one end of the map doesn't trigger an event that you hear down here. So I don't have a billion virtual voices. I only have voices of the animals that are close by and interesting to me. So there's never anything more loaded than my current biome, my current music, whatever I'm doing, what I'm wearing, and whatever NPC can come at me. And it's very few things. And then you can always make it sound more grand by compressing it, spicing it up, you know.
And putting some reverb.
Yes, exactly. Reverb and compression. Limiters. There you go.
Thanks a lot, man.
You're welcome. More. We're 2 minutes over time.
That's it. Great. Can I get a round of applause, please?